Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're here for another one of your questions about work. And this is one that comes up a lot in our line of work with founders. For those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy, a startup investor in the future of work. And this is my teammate, Lori. And it's a delicate one. So, Lori, let's jump in.
Let's do it. I love these conversations because we hit on the questions that people are really asking. So the question today is, as a founder, how do I know when it's time to sell my company?
Yeah. So there can be so many reasons that I just kind of want to walk through. I'm going to start with the luxurious case. The luxurious case is you have the luxury of believing you have a choice about this. And so it starts with like, what do you want? And then we can talk about less luxurious case, which is, do you have to? And then there's the, is it worth my time to explore, which is sort of the practical side of it and how you get advice about it. So just starting with what you want, I just say, there are many valid reasons to want to sell a company. And one of the hard things about the industry in which we are is that sometimes revealing to people that you are willing to sell can change their commitment to you. So
Right.
like you reveal it to the wrong investor, you reveal it to a person you're about to hire. And as a result, it feels like a very sensitive kind of thing. And another reason it's sensitive is it ties together so many important factors. Like it's like this thing that you've created that you really care about, that might
It's an
be one
extension of you.
Yeah, that you might not, this thing that might have 150% of your net worth in it. You know, selling it under some circumstance could make you like set up your great grandchildren or not. And so it's important, I think, to recognize, I think many people avoid the discomfort of that difficult question by just having a pat answer of like, we're going to the moon, or, you know, whatever, some pat answer. And it starts to me with being honest with yourself about, one way I'd put it is, are there any conditions right now under which I would want to sell my company? Meaning, is there some no-brainer threshold? And, you know, sometimes one lawyer who I really respect taught me about the rule of 8, which is the first time a founder believes they can make $8 million personally off the sale of a company is the first time that they are, and obviously this is like the highest class problems imaginable, right? We're talking about like, not even, we were talking about not 1% problems, but like 1 basis point problems.
Yeah.
You know, that's a moment because, and who knows why, and who knows if it's pre or post tax, but you know, is that because like they imagine like I could buy a house and have some money and then enough money to do my next thing? I mean, I don't know, whatever their logic is. We'll also bracket the question of selling part of your stake by making some money. But the first thing is what your goals really are. And if you have co-founders, ideally you have the kind of relationship where it's trusting enough where you can all have these conversations. If not, try to get as close to that as you can, because a really destructive thing that can happen is people talk about selling, but they pretend they're talking about something else. Like they're talking about macroeconomic conditions about whether it's the right time to sell, when really it's like, I'm going to have a baby in 6 months and we don't own a house and I'd really like to own a house. And so like the closer you can get, starting with yourself and then to your co-founders, for the real reasons. And sometimes it's what some VCs call being afraid of the business, meaning I'm worried our growth is going to stop. I don't know why we still, so maybe this is just the time. So it's real clarity about that. And then you can ask yourself, once you have clarity, and it's sort of impossible to go through every scenario because there's so many reasons to sell. I want to make some money right now. I'm afraid it's not going to work out. I'm tired of the roller coaster and I wanted
to bring that up, right? You know, like the mental health side.
Totally. Somebody approached me, and you know, we talk about how to sell a company separately, but somebody approached me and wow, I think it'd be really cool to work at my dream company if they bought us in, and that's how I could be an executive at this company. I mean, you know, we're investors in a company that wasn't confirmed yet, but reported on, that was, you know, X's first acquisition, Elon's acquisition at Twitter. You know, like that could be a cool ride for those founders, you know, that kind of thing. So that's kind of one category I think about, which is, do you want to? And if so, what are your, do you want to is not the right way to put it. Under what conditions would you want to, like I said, and for what reasons? Like money, life experience, relief. I mean, there are many valid reasons. So before I go on, how does that?
So it's, the question is almost, it's almost, why are you even considering this, right? Like, why is this crossing your mind rather than like, what do you want? Because most people don't know. And I think another worthy question is, who's putting it in your ear? and paying attention to where the idea came from, whether, because a lot of the examples you gave were internal, but I think it can sometimes come from other people that give you the idea that you have to, given, the market or whatever else,
Yeah.
XYZ.
I mean, I think that, first of all, I'll just say, why is it even crossing your mind is a totally valid question. And for some founders, it crosses their mind constantly. Like when I was a founder, I thought about how we would sell the company and wanting to sell the company every day, every single day. And the reason for that is I knew we were working on something special. I knew how financially important it was to me. I knew that to make it a wild success would require a lot of capital. And I believed that we'd have a better chance at that at a big company. But I also wasn't working full time on the company for stretches. And so I also deferred to the CEO what she wanted for the company. But I'm pretty sure that if we had gotten an offer to sell the company the same day our Series A term sheet, we signed our Series A term sheet at the price of that term sheet, I'm pretty sure we both would have sold the company. Because at that point between us, we owned, I don't know, 80% of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'd have done great. And other founders think differently based on their own psychology. And so there is like a, why did this come up for me? There's also one other kind of form of fiction that comes up, which is the value maximization fiction. Like a lot of people have the conversation around like, well, here's where we are on our growth curve and here's what's happening with the market. And therefore this is the right time to sell. And that would be fine if you're a VC with a portfolio of assets and you're just trying to maximize the value of one asset. But when you're a founder, the risk factors in a ton, meaning an 80% chance of selling today for half the amount that you might have a 20% chance of a year from now is not like a calculation you do by multiplying 80% by 20%, 80% by one value versus 20% by the other value, because the risk is huge to you. Like there's a huge difference between making $0 and $2 million is a lot bigger than the difference between making $2 million and $4 million.
Yes. I saw that Imad from Mercury had a thread about this where he talked about how they could have sold their company at a certain point, and then they decided they wanted to keep grinding for the next 5 years. And they only sold it for 2 times more than what they could have 5 years ago. And this was his company, obviously, before Mercury. And he realized that potentially it could have been a better decision to sell earlier, just to go on and try new things.
Yeah, and hammering away. You never know really what the alternative is. It's hard to know. And so I just think it's important to be honest with yourself that these aren't rational financial calculations, although rational financial thinking plays a role in the decision making about it. Second thing is just, do you have to? Which is basically like, am I about to run out of money? Do I think I can't raise money and I might actually be able to sell? In which case, like it's a question of alternatives. If it's your alternative to going out of business, and that's a different kind of a sale process because it happens under time pressure and generally you have less of an asset to work with and that kind of thing. And that leads to me to the kind of, in a way, the most important question, which is not, do I want to sell my company? That's important when you have an offer on the table. But is it worth investing my time in the exploration of selling my company? Because sometimes it's like I have to spend time, which could take away from progressing the business just to figure out if it's even an available option. And that's where the way I think about it is many of the first steps in selling a company look like the first steps in developing the business. You look for reasons to partner, but not sell to companies that are in your domain that have some asset. They can help distribute your product. They can promote it to people. They have a complementary product. And that's sort of how you get to know the person who might be the one to buy it. But then this is sort of the question underneath all of this is who around you has expertise in understanding what it looks like to sell a company, who you trust to think about it from your perspective, not their own perspective. So you may have a very trusting relationship with your investor. And obviously we try to think about it from the founder's perspective, but founders are nervous to talk to us about it. They're worried that if they even bring it up, we're going to think differently of them forever, which we don't. But I mean, other than it's a fact about what they're thinking about, it's not like we judge it. But I understand why some investors, like the second you bring it up, it's like, oh, they started talking about selling the company. And so you got to arrange to have people around you who have expertise in how this process works and are aligned with you. And that could be a founder you deeply trust. It could be a friend who's gone through this before. It could be an investor. But finding somebody like that is just really valuable because otherwise you're just in your own head.
Oh, 100%. And I think what you were talking about, that moment when you're running out of cash, is so relevant right now for a lot of folks. of seeing that, there's 6 or less months left and kind of being under duress of like, which option do I take? And that question of return on time matters more then than ever, right? So do you have any kind of ways to think about that exact kind of high anxiety moment of which path at the fork do I go down?
Selling takes a lot longer than people think. Unless you get lucky, it takes 3 months to a first offer is fast. Yeah. That's to the offer, let alone closing it, which takes a lot longer than a VC deal does, for example. And I'm assuming you're in some business where there isn't a liquid market for selling it. I mean, the company you started, let's just generalize it, is like a small business in a category where there's a lot of buying and selling. You run a HVAC supply company and there's a bunch of things that look like it. There's known buyers in the market. Then it's different. There's a little bit more of a liquid market. For certain SaaS businesses at small scale, there's a liquid market where they'll pay you X times your profit. And so then it's a little more routine. And we can talk about whether to get an investment banker, that kind of thing. So the first thing is just recognize it generally takes a lot longer than you think. Yeah. And the second is it's really hard to separate out your own ego from it, of like, this is going to be embarrassing if I'm forced to sell. And so finding somebody you can talk to, again, back to the person you can trust, who can be, we call this a micro coach, somebody who can be like, well, here's the wording you use in an email when you write the person at the acquirer. So it doesn't look like you're desperate, but you're still being clear about your intention. And there's just all these little details that are hard to see because you feel embarrassed or you feel terrified or you feel something. And so it's the recognizing it takes a long time and getting a good micro coach.
Yeah. I think that's great. And so the reality is it's a lot earlier than people might even know that they have kind of a dire situation on their hands.
Yeah, that's right. And I just avoid any pat wisdom about it. Like there is no one size fits all answer on any of this. These are some of the most difficult decisions. The most difficult founder decisions, the most difficult decisions in life are one-way doors, and selling your company is a one-way door. Even spending the time to explore selling your company is a bit of a one-way door because you can't get that time back. And so,
often that when you sign on to stay with that company for a year or 2 years after the acquisition, that's another, kind of time you can't get back.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, this dialogue generally unfolds with a founder, just to say in practice, they'll be like, so whisper. And it's like, oh, cool. You talking about whether it's the right idea for you to sell your company. I don't care. What I care about first is, what do you want? And and I tell them, like, you don't have to be open with me, but if you can be, that's great. But like, sometimes founders will be like, no, here's a number. Like, we know if we can get X, we'll sell the company. The other thing I just say is founders start loading these things with lots of bullshit. Like, I want to go to a place where it's going to have a good home. And it's like, sure, you don't want to be professionally humiliated, but when you sell the company, you've sold the company.
Yeah, I think people also don't realize how many mergings of culture, whatever you want to call it, like when the startup gets integrated into a big company, how most of them culture-wise are terrible. Yeah. And that it's more often than not that it's going to be some kind of struggle for the folks that are making that change internally.
Amen. And so, reasoning it through, trying to get really deep with yourself on what you really want, whether or not you can be honest with others. You can be honest with yourself. Ideally, you can be honest with your co-founders. And ideally, you have somebody with expertise here who you can be honest with. And then, then it's time to weigh.
Yeah, love that.
All right, awesome. Thank you. For folks, we will put this one up on thisisnotadvice.work, where you can see all our past episodes and transcripts of some as we work on them. It's open source. So if you're like a total addict to this is not advice stuff, go in there and fix some stuff up for us. And you can find the short form version of this on Jam. For those of you who may be watching for the first time, this is not advice because we're not telling you whether to sell your company. We don't know. We're just giving you our way of thinking about it. And ultimately, you have to make your own decisions. And thank you.
Amazing.
Fun to do this with you. All right, to be continued.